So there's currently a bit of a problem in the Monster Hunter community. We just got the weapon preview videos for Sunbreak, showcasing how the 14 weapons are going to change and, hopefully, be improved in Sunbreak. And well, not all weapons are made equal, I suppose, as there are some clear winners that have received major additions to their kit, while some others were essentially shafted, abandoned and left to die. Among the winners, the one that stands out the most is, of course, the Longsword. Over the last few years, Longsword has received a bit of a negative reputation. Despite the weapon being balanced and quite simple when it was introduced back in Generation 2, the Longsword has now essentially become a parry machine that is focused on not taking any damage from the monster while utterly destroying them without a care. The weapon has undergone massive changes from when it was first introduced into the series, and given current events, I think we should talk about why the Longsword is clearly the most controversial weapon in the Monster Hunter series. Now, I don't know when all of this started, but for as long as I can remember, Longsword has always had this weird reputation in the community. I should mention that I used to be a Longsword main back in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, and it was always among my top 3 most used weapons in 4U, World and even Rise. However, I never really took part in any sort of community discussions or anything, nor did I watch many videos before the release of Monster Hunter World, with the exception of course of RX Gaming, Gaijin Hunter and Team Darkside, so there was really no way for me to know if the community liked or disliked the Longsword. That is to say that I've only really noticed any negative feelings towards the weapon after World's release. Longsword is an agile weapon that allows you to reposition yourself as well as dodge and parry incoming attacks, all the while keeping up the aggression as you deal great damage. In addition, its long-reaching moves and the ability to bypass hardened monster parts by the use of the Spirit Slash combo makes for a very accessible and appealing weapon without even needing to mention how cool some of the Longsword designs are. However, this description would be somewhat inaccurate if we're talking about the Longsword ever since Monster Hunter World released. As stated earlier, Longsword was rather simple and clean, with moves such as Fate Slash only allowing you to dash backwards until the 3rd generation of Monster Hunter games, and from then onwards the weapon would only receive smaller additions up until its parry-centric style was introduced through the Valor style in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. Now, it is important to mention that a lot of the weapons in Generations Ultimate were able to use Valor style or Adept style in order to have access to a more parry-focused or dodge-focused combat style. It's not like it was exclusive to the Longsword, but it certainly was accentuated with the Longsword through the use of Valor style. But after Generations Ultimate or Double Cross, we then got Monster Hunter World, where the Longsword received its biggest changes and it became a completely different weapon. The introduction of Foresight Slash gave Longsword a reliable way to maintain the spirit gauge always at red, all the while evading the monster's attacks. The invincibility frames of this move are pretty forgiving, and if you put a couple of minutes into the practice area, you'll be able to consistently pull this off against most monsters. Longsword also saw the addition of Spirit Helm Breaker, a finisher type move that would consume one of your spirit gauges in order to unleash a lot of damage. This was the flashiest move the Longsword has ever received up until this point, and was the start of what many see as the Longsword transforming into this completely different weapon. And things changed even more in the Iceborne expansion, where the Longsword got access to even more counter-type moves in the form of EI Slash. With the regular EI Slash, if you were to time this correctly against a monster's attack, the EI Slash would increase your spirit gauge, and if you were to time this against a monster's attack correctly, it would fill your gauge even faster, and you would parry said attack and take reduced damage from it. EI Spirit Slash was an extremely powerful attack that would consume one of your spirit gauge levels, However, if you were to perform this move in the right timing against a monster's attack, you would not consume spirit gauge levels, and you would parry said monster's attack. And now, in Monster Hunter Rise, Longsword has access to even more powerful moves, such as Serene Post Counter, a wirebug skill that at the cost of 2 wirebugs allows you to pretty much become invulnerable for a couple of seconds and parry any incoming attacks. While yes, 2 spirit bugs might be somewhat costly, we have to take into account that the Longsword already has so many incredible tools available at its disposal. If the monster is going to attack you, you can Foresight Slash, use an EI Slash or EI Spirit Slash, or Serene Post Counter. Not to mention that the Longsword is a pretty fast weapon, so you can always sheath your weapon and get off the way pretty quickly. And you have the classic old reliable Fade Slash, which was originally meant to be able to distance yourself from the monster, dodging incoming attacks, all the while dealing some damage. However, it didn't give any invincibility frames, and that's what I think is the biggest gripe with the Monster Hunter community and how they see this weapon. Every encounter is going to be much safer when you are using the Longsword because of its overtuned kit. But also make no mistake, just because the Longsword is accessible and is so powerful, it doesn't mean that it takes some skill to use. In fact, I would argue that the Longsword has an extremely high skill ceiling, as once you master this weapon, you can punish every single attack the monster throws at you. But in order to do so, you need to time your moves well and be able to read what the monster's about to do, which takes a considerable amount of time to master. I mean, just look at Peppo, he makes it look absolutely broken. And I guess that's how many in the community seem to feel about the Longsword. Which is understandable, as I said, it has an overtuned kit, deals way too much damage for what it offers you, and lets you completely stomp monsters without a care in the world, as you can pretty much spam your iframe moves with Quick Sheaths level 3. It's not rare to see players complaining about how broken the Longsword is. However, I would argue that ranged weapons, the bow as well as the heavy bowgun especially, are just as powerful, if not more powerful than the Longsword. If we are to look at it analytically, the ranged weapons seem to perform a lot better in speedruns. While the Longsword remains in the top 5 consistently, which is a very respectable place, it is simply very difficult for the Longsword to surpass those weapons in speedruns. Not that the weapons should be balanced around speedruns exclusively, but I do believe it paints a pretty good picture of how strong each weapon is compared to the others. But regardless of there being weapons that are historically and statistically stronger, Longsword seems to be the one that gets trashed the most. That being said, I think we can look into a few key reasons as to why so many people feel this way about the Longsword. One could say that the Longsword's aesthetic is partly to blame for the hate it gets. It's the weeb weapon, along with the dual blades, and it's too much anime. Those typical stereotypes. Personally, I don't think this argument holds too well, seeing as a very sizable portion of the community seems to embrace that aspect, plus Monster Hunter has had many collaboration events in the past with several anime and manga, especially in Japan, so I really don't think this is it. One thing, however, that I could see having contributed to this negative sentiment is, well, the staggers. Longsword being a weapon with a very wide reach, if you're playing in multiplayer, it's almost inevitable that you're going to hit your teammates and flinch them, causing them to get frustrated, especially if a Longsword flinch is the reason why they couldn't properly dodge or block an attack and why they carted. Most of us have probably not only seen this happen, but have also most likely been on the receiving end of it, seeing as Longsword has been the most popular weapon for a very long time. And the reason why I can say with some confidence that most of us have experienced this is because of Monster Hunter World's forced multiplayer. Now, I don't want to go too off topic, as that is an issue that I could dedicate a whole video talking about, but the fact that so much of the endgame content of Monster Hunter World were quests designed for multiplayer specifically, was already frustrating for some. Now add a Longsword player that is somewhat unaware of their surroundings and hit some of their teammates by mistake, leading to cards and possibly failed quests in content that for some could take quite some time, such as Kulf the Wrath, where most teams would usually take 2 runs to fully clear Kulf and get the rewards, or content that was quite challenging, such as Extreme Behemoth. Well, I think you get the picture. However, the situation wasn't really all that terrible, as if the hunting party were to organize itself, the Longsword users could stay on the monster's tail, while the rest of the hunters could focus on the monster's different weak spots. And if being flinched by your teammates was that big of an issue for you, which was a common occurrence with other weapons such as bow, charge blade, dual blades, heavy bowgun, it's not just a longsword problem, you could equip flinch free level 1, which yes, it would take a decoration slot just to fix that problem, but it is something that you could do. Now that is not to say that this mechanic of flinching your teammates is something that should be in the game. I believe it should be removed. It adds pretty much nothing to the game. The only reason for this to be in Monster Hunter is that in the case of a teammate being stunned or put to sleep, you hit them and they are no longer stunned or asleep. But how often does that happen, especially in multiplayer quests where you need to wake them up? It's rarely a thing, and I don't think it justifies the frustration of being hit by a teammate or you having to equip flinch free just to not deal with that issue. Many memes were born from this whole ordeal, and some of them were admittedly quite funny. Despite that, I feel as though the Longsword's reputation suffered quite a bit here. And my last argument, and probably the biggest deal here, as to why the Longsword is so controversial and so hated in the Monster Hunter community is, well, favoritism. Let's be honest, Longsword saw a huge amount of changes ever since World was introduced. It was possibly in the top 2 or 3 weapons that received the most changes from the old generation of Monster Hunters to Generation 5. Additionally, all of the moves the Longsword received in Rise, all the while it being the strongest melee weapon, really further compounded this thought of favoritism, which I think is even more present in the story of Monster Hunter Rise, where in the village quests, after you complete all of them, you end up receiving a special longsword that is given to you by the village chief. And at the start of the very game you also start with a longsword. And I guess this would make the longsword the canonical weapon the hunter uses in the story of Rise. And I can see this being aggravating, especially to those that already dislike the longsword. And what's more, now that we have received the weapon preview videos for the Sunbreak expansion, we all know that the longsword is receiving some massive buffs, while some weapons that were desperately in need of some big changes, such as the charge blade, the gun lance, and especially the lance, they were shafted completely. I mean, the gun lance changes look somewhat fun, but they might not be all that great. But the charge blade and especially the lance, let's be honest, those additions aren't really that big of a deal. They don't feel like they're going to change the weapon all that much, and those 2 weapons were already in need of some good stuff. As I said at the start of the video, they really do feel like they were shafted and left to be dead. No disrespect here towards lance players and charge blade players. I used to love charge blade, and I enjoyed using lance a lot in Monster Hunter World, especially after the Iceborne expansion. They did such a good job with the lance there, but they completely botched it in Rise. I'm not sure what the thought process was by the developers when making these new movesets for the weapons, but one thing is for certain, the player base hated some of these changes, or at least they're really upset that some weapons are being shafted. When you look at the like to dislike ratio from these videos, especially in the Japanese videos, you can tell that players really dislike how some weapons are being treated here. And I assure you that dislikes on the Longsword videos are not because people are upset at the changes, it's because they love what they see and would like to see their weapons also getting those changes. but it's just that the Longsword, the most popular and the most powerful melee weapon that already has such a powerful kit that allows you to obliterate monsters without them interacting with you, is the one that receives some of the biggest buffs. There is some clear frustration in the Monster Hunter community, and as someone that loves the Longsword and has used it a lot throughout the years, I also understand where everyone is coming from. I wish all the other weapons would receive these big changes as well. Hopefully the developers look at the negative reception that all of these weapons have received and understand that the players are frustrated, the community is looking to see other weapons being stronger as well. Yes, it is a PvE game, but I believe that balance in the PvE game is important as well. This video is already long enough, so I'm not going to go into that right now, but I may talk about that in a different video, because I've also been seeing a lot of arguments on Twitter about this, and I think that balance should not be ignored like that. I think ignoring the balance problem in Monster Hunter right now would be dismissing how a lot of players feel about the games as a whole, and that's just something we should not do. But anyways, enough rambling. This is a very long video, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Most of the script was already written a long time ago before I got back to making videos, but the weapon showcase videos were the perfect opportunity for me to return to the script and add some stuff to it because I think it was pretty relevant. Let me know what you guys think about this issue. Do you believe that the dislike or the hate the Longsword receives is warranted? Do you think the balance of Monster Hunter is something that should be taken into account? Or is it okay for some weapons to be overpowered and some weapons to be clearly underpowered because it's a PvE game? Let's talk about that in the comments. I may feature some of them in an upcoming video. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Dark Hero, and happy hunting!